All views expressed are those of the speakers and their organizations, as this applies to IGDS as well.
I'm really pleased to invite our next speaker to the floor. Adeline Gregoire is the founder and director of Women Everywhere, a nonprofit organization based in Trinidad and Tobago, focusing on the holistic empowerment of women and girls through education, physical well-being, and self-awareness. Her organization, Women Everywhere, launched the first edition of International Women's Week locally, a celebration of women, girls, and their achievements during the second week of March in 2017. A graduate of the University of Caen in France, she holds an MA in Multicultural Project Management and a BSc in Education and Gender Studies. Human rights, social equity, and education among her key interests. Adeline is also the co-founder of Culture Go magazine, co-founder of BEAR, and member of the 100 Women Who Care Trinidad and Tobago chapter. She's worked over the past 10 years in cultural and event management, public diplomacy, and considerable NGO experience along the way. I'd like to invite Adeline to the floor. Thank you so much.
So, hello everyone, good afternoon. Thanks for being here first of all. A very, very special thanks to the IGDS for organizing such a necessary event right now. So today I would actually like to address the question of gender-based violence as a wider problem in our society. As I said, we're here to talk about gender-based violence not as a single issue, but a wider problem for us all, and the measures which must be taken for us to eradicate this as a social ill. In Trinidad and Tobago, of course, but worldwide. It's a worldwide problem, as we've been reminded today. And so to start, today is actually day 12 of the 16 days of activism worldwide, and this is against gender-based violence. Gender-based violence distinguishes itself from violence as a regular term. Why? Because it targets women and girls because of their gender, because of their sex, simply because we are female. And so it can range from domestic violence, it can go to rape, sexual abuse, intimidation techniques, even female genital mutilation, okay? So just to give you an idea, gender-based violence is not only what we see, it's also what we don't see, it's invisible. It can be sexual, psychological, even financial, okay, structural as well. And we talk about this, for example, when we have institutions who pretty much reinforce gender stereotypes, which deliberately allow women, or rather prevent women from having the same economic and financial opportunities as men, okay? So let's just talk about what Women Everywhere, my organization, is doing during the 16 days of activism. Alongside the Two Cents movement, we're extremely proud to have a program, well, it's actually a nationwide campaign called the Side by Side We Stand. And it's an awareness campaign with several goals. First of all, of course, to raise awareness, encourage the wider public to focus on gender-based violence as a real issue, something that's important for us all. Encourage people to think of this problem, this issue as a social ill, and ultimately to motivate our citizens, empower them, men and women alike, children of course as well, to take action, to stand up against gender-based violence, GBV, to call it out. And so just that we have an idea of just how prevalent and how serious gender-based violence is in Trinidad and Tobago. Just yesterday, I don't know if you saw the news, if you got a chance to have a look, a woman and her daughter, for example, were savagely chopped by someone who is their husband, according to media, and for that girl, her father. We have endless stories like this in Trinidad and Tobago. It's sad, it's terrifying. And so, the Angostura question, the Angostura case, is just another example of GBV. It's another example of where violence is exerted against women, violence that comes from the system, from the structure. and especially raises the problem of how we view sexual harassment. It brings to light where we are as a society, how we measure up against international standards, what is our place in this world in terms of gender-based policies, how we react to these issues. Do we even take sexual harassment seriously, for example? How are we reacting as a society? How are we reacting not only as academics, but what is the word on the street? And finally, what are the policies that we have in place? So I wanted to give you an idea, and I've prepared a slideshow here today. This is not something we've invented. It's not a case of good graphic design. I'd like to show you a few screenshots seen on Facebook this week and the weeks before in response to the Angostura case. Well, we have this first one, so I'll just give you the time to read. Okay, and we move on to a second one. All right, almost. Okay, and the last one. Okay, right, so this is just, this is real life. These are our citizens. So we obviously have a very, very long way to go in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, while these are scandalous and amusing for some, because I do imagine that the goal is to have fun at something that's extremely serious, at the end it is scary, it's terrifying. It's terrifying for me as a woman to read these comments that are hateful, aggressive, brazen, but most of all disrespectful. And on the question of disrespect, the Princeton University You Matter section has recently published some work on the relationship or link between disrespect and violence. They call it, or they've dubbed it, the respect, disrespect, violence continuum. Okay? So we can have a look, and I'll just read it very quickly for you. In the respect, disrespect, violence continuum, disrespect is a precursor to violence. In the absence of respect, people hurt each other emotionally and physically. Also, disrespectful behavior can be directed at one person by another. It is rarely a personal issue. Often there are systems in play that tolerate disrespect and discourage people from taking action to intervene. When disrespectful behavior goes unchecked, like a virus, it spreads to more and more members of society and becomes a bigger and broader cultural issue. And so, as a society, this is where our problems start. When we allow disrespectful attitudes, disrespectful behavior, and voices of some, and sometimes it is the majority, to overpower and even silence those who dare say something else. In this scenario, women, girls, and men too are afraid to speak up, always doubting whether they will even be taken seriously. Okay? And sometimes it goes as far as whether they should say anything at all. And the danger with this is that it establishes a precedent. It establishes a precedent that when we don't speak up about something, it means that we accept it. As the old saying says, silence gives consent. It means that we're pretty much not bothered by this. Now, how do we avoid the worst? How do we press brakes? So, at Women Everywhere, we've outlined a few solutions that we think can work, maybe short-term and long-term, mid to long-term. Okay? So how about, first of all, let's start on an individual level. Listening to victims, listening to survivors. Stop the victim blaming. I think we've seen a lot of that recently. Cultivate empathy. Think about how empathetic we are as individuals, when we hear someone's story, what is our first reaction? Are we thinking that, oh no, this can't be real, this is a lie, you're making this up? And finally, men speak out, men speak up. As a group, an organization focused on empowerment of women and men, our difference is that we're inclusive. We are not here to bash men as a feminist organization. We recognize that men are our allies. Men are a necessary part of the solution. In gender-based violence, by far, the proportion of people affected by violence are women. Incidentally, the percentage of people who are actually the perpetrators of these violent acts are men. Okay, so it's a call for everyone to do their part to speak up. In terms of long-term and mid-term solutions, let's have a look. Education. Education is key. It's the cornerstone of any society. Our kids in the classrooms need to be aware of what gender equality is. Violence stems at the very basis from a very unequal view of what boys and girls are, what they're capable of. It gives men, it gives boys a sense of entitlement over the little girls with whom they're in class. That's a problem. We need to build a culture of respect. And by respect, it doesn't mean that I have to use an obscene word against you. It's how degrading you speak to your friends about me as a woman. It's the sly remarks, the innuendos. Trust. As a society, we need to be able to trust each other. Victims need to be able to trust each other. We need to, as citizens, to be able to trust our government, the systems that are put in place. Fair and independent investigations are also necessary. Policies to protect women and girls are the absolute goal for any progressive society. And so at the end of this campaign of 16 days against activism, the work does not stop here. We're calling on each one of you who've actually come out today to support us. Right now, there is a petition online on change.org, change.org, where we invite citizens, we're only asking for 100 signatures to begin, to sign a petition that shows your commitment to implementing a sexual harassment policy in all the organizations in Trinidad and Tobago, public, private sector, institutions, schools, you know, it's across the board, no pun intended. So, thank you for being here, and there is power in numbers. Please take the time, see what we're doing. This is not about crazy activism. Please speak up. We need your voices. Together we are stronger. We will go further. And as the old saying says again, silence does give consent. Let's think about that. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for those reminders, and just thinking about what Adeline raised around silence and the work of education and the role of the Institute in doing work around gender-based violence for many years. I want to acknowledge Professor Reddock, who's here, whose work on Break the Silence to End Child Sexual Abuse has been one of our longest running campaigns and speaks to what some of these issues around what does it mean to break the silence, and breaking silence, especially thinking about how we listen to survivors, how do we cultivate empathy, and having men speak out. I think that was a really important point, and really speaks also to our next speaker, who I will introduce in a second. And I just want to also acknowledge that the Institute is very dedicated to working with men around issues of gender-based violence, and we really applaud Mr. Kirk Waithe today for being here and speaking out against sexual harassment. And want to acknowledge that the IGDS has been engaged in a campaign, Red Card for Rape Culture, which is working with men to talk about consent. I've also been working with my project, A Sexual Culture of Justice, where we've been doing specific gender-based violence training workshops with men to create champions against gender-based violence. And a part of that work in the last 2 months witnessing how difficult it is for men to call each other out, how difficult it is to speak up, and importantly, also for men who experience violence through whatever form of masculinity you present to the world, and gender is also a form of gender-based violence in which feminine men, gay men, gender non-conforming people also experience the brunt of violence publicly because of how they present in the world if you don't conform to the particular attitudes and behaviors that you're socialized and supposed to be as a man or a woman. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that too.